The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated in the dark void between galaxies like a giant metal flower, its 12 arms stretched out in perfect symmetry, each one representing one of the most powerful alien races in the galaxy. Today, those arms buzzed with activity as ships from across known space docked at the station. The Galactic Council was meeting, and when the Council met in emergency session, the entire galaxy held its breath. Chancellor Kethmaron of the Vorthak Empire stood at the center of the great assembly hall. His gray skin looked almost silver under the harsh lights, and his 4 black eyes scanned the other council members with cold calculation. The Vorthaks had ruled their corner of space for over 2,000 years through careful planning and ruthless efficiency. They did not make decisions based on emotion or fear, only on logic and survival. High Commander Vexithara of the Zalani sat across from him, her blue-scaled hands drumming impatiently on the table. The Zalani were warriors by nature, bred for conflict and conquest. Where the Vorthaks used their minds as weapons, the Zalani preferred more direct approaches. Her red eyes glowed with barely contained anger as she waited for the session to begin. The other 10 races filled the remaining seats around the circular table. The plant-like Thornians swayed gently in their biosuits, while the crystalline Nexari chimed softly to each other in their musical language. The insectoid hive mind representatives sat perfectly still, their compound eyes reflecting the light like mirrors. Each race was different. Each had evolved on worlds millions of light years apart. But today they all shared one common goal. They wanted humanity gone. Kethmaron activated the holographic display in the center of the table. Images of human worlds appeared one by one. Earth with its blue oceans and white clouds, New Sol with its towering crystal cities, the mining colonies of the Outer Rim with their massive industrial complexes. Over 200 human settlements scattered across the galaxy, home to 40 billion human beings. Fellow council members, Kethmaron began, his voice carrying easily through the translator devices each member wore. We face a threat unlike any our galaxy has ever known. Not from invasion or war, but from something far more dangerous, unpredictability. The images changed to show human achievements over the past 3 centuries. First contact had occurred in 2157 when human explorer ships stumbled across a Thornian research station. At that time, humans barely had faster-than-light travel and primitive energy weapons. They should have remained a minor species, grateful for whatever scraps the established powers threw their way. Instead, they had become something none of the big council races had expected. In just 300 years, Kethmaron continued, humans have gone from primitive space travel to challenging our most fundamental institutions. They adapt faster than any known species. They learn our technologies and improve upon them. They refuse to accept the natural order that has kept our galaxy stable for millennia. High Commander Vexithara leaned forward, her scales rattling with agitation. They are not just adapting. They are corrupting everything they touch. Human mercenaries fight alongside rebel groups on 17 different worlds. Human traders ignore our carefully negotiated trade agreements and sell weapons to anyone with currency. Human diplomats question decisions that have been law for longer than their entire species has existed. The Nexari representative chimed in agreement, the sound like crystal bells in a gentle breeze. Through the translator, her words came out measured and precise. The humans call it fairness and justice, but what they really mean is chaos. They want to tear down systems that have maintained peace and prosperity for thousands of years. Kethmaron nodded and brought up a new image. It showed a human in formal diplomatic robes standing before the council chamber just 6 months ago. His name was Kong Do-hyun, and he had been Earth's representative to the Galactic Council. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his brown eyes held the kind of determined intelligence that had made humans so dangerous. Representative Kang discovered irregularities in the Nexus trade agreements, Kethmaron said, his voice growing colder. Information that was meant to remain classified for the stability of our economic systems. He threatened to expose what he called systematic exploitation of developing worlds unless major reforms were implemented. The room fell silent except for the soft humming of the station's life support systems. Every council member knew what those trade agreements contained. They had been carefully crafted over centuries to ensure that the 12 council races maintained their dominance over the hundreds of lesser species in the galaxy. Resources flowed upward, technology was shared selectively, and worlds that tried to advance too quickly found themselves facing mysterious accidents or economic sanctions. It was not evil, the council told themselves. It was necessary. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and strong leadership was required to maintain order. The council races had earned their positions through superior technology, ancient wisdom, and natural selection. It was the way things had always been. But humans did not see it that way. Kang Do-yun has returned to Earth, Vexthara said, her voice a low growl. Our intelligence sources report that he is preparing to release his findings to every world, in the galaxy simultaneously. He calls it the Great Revelation and believes it will spark what he terms a galactic revolution for justice. The hive mind representative spoke for the first time, their collective voice echoing strangely through the translator. Analysis indicates 73.6% probability of widespread rebellion if human data is released. Projected outcome: complete dissolution of current power structures within 50 standard years. Kethmaran deactivated the holographic display and looked around the table. Which brings us to why we are here today. The human problem has reached a critical point. We can no longer manage them through traditional diplomatic or economic pressure. They have become too numerous, too advanced, and too influential. A Thornian delegate swayed forward, their voice rustling like leaves in wind. What solution do you propose, Chancellor? Surely you are not suggesting open warfare. The humans have proven remarkably effective in military conflicts. That was an understatement that everyone in the room understood. Human soldiers fought with a combination of tactical intelligence and reckless bravery that had surprised every military force they had encountered. They seemed to thrive in chaos, turning disadvantages into opportunities and finding victory in situations where any logical species would surrender. 3 separate attempts to intimidate human colonies through shows of force had ended in humiliating defeats for council fleets. Not warfare, Kethmaran replied. Something more efficient. Our scientists have developed what they call the Omega Protocol. He activated a new display, this one showing complex quantum equations and molecular diagrams. The images meant little to most of the council members, but the implications were clear enough. A quantum virus, he explained, designed to target human DNA specifically. It spreads through hyperspace communication networks, ensuring simultaneous delivery to every human world. Once activated, it disrupts cellular function at the molecular level. Death occurs within hours, and there is no known cure. The silence that followed was deeper than the void of space itself. Even among the council races, such a weapon was almost unthinkable. Total extinction of an entire species had never been attempted on this scale. The Nexari representative was the first to speak, her chimes now discordant and sharp. The ethical implications of such an action are irrelevant, Vexthara interrupted. Ethics are a luxury we cannot afford when facing an existential threat. The humans will not stop until they have torn down everything we have built. This is not murder. It is surgery. The virus leaves no trace, Kethmaran added. To outside observers, it will appear that humanity suffered from a rapid pandemic, possibly caused by their own reckless genetic experimentation. The galaxy will mourn the loss of such a dynamic species, but life will continue. One by one, the council members indicated their agreement. The Thornians swayed reluctantly, but ultimately nodded their bulbous heads. The hive mind calculated probabilities and found the math acceptable. Even the normally peaceful Nexari agreed that sometimes beautiful music required the removal of discordant notes. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would be eliminated from the galaxy. As the council members filed out of the chamber to return to their ships, none of them noticed the small human maintenance worker who had been cleaning the air vents above the assembly hall. Li Wanbin had been working on Nexus Prime for 2 years, part of the human technical crew that kept the massive station running. He had heard every word through the ventilation system, and his hands shook as he carefully recorded the conversation on a small device hidden in his toolkit. 3 hours later, as the Council fleets began to disperse across the galaxy to implement the Omega Protocol, Wanbin was aboard a small cargo ship heading for the research station, where his colleague, Dr. Park Minji, was conducting xenobiological studies. He had no idea if his warning would arrive in time, or if anything could be done to stop what was coming. But he had to try. Behind him, Nexus Prime continued its slow rotation in the darkness, and the galaxy moved one step closer to a future that none of its inhabitants could eye. 6 months had passed since the last human voice had been heard anywhere in the galaxy. The Omega Protocol had worked exactly as Chancellor Kethmarin had promised. Within 72 hours of activation, every human settlement had gone silent. Reconnaissance drones sent to major human worlds confirmed what the Council already knew. The cities were empty, the ships were drifting without crew, and humanity had been erased from existence as cleanly as deleting a file from a computer. The sea. Galaxy should have been celebrating. Instead, it was beginning to tear itself apart. The first sign of trouble came from the Outer Rim territories, where the aggressive Scareth Empire had been held in check for decades by human peacekeeping forces. Without those neutral mediators, old territorial disputes flared back to life like embers touched by oxygen. Scareth warships crossed into Thornian space and destroyed 3 agricultural worlds before anyone realized what was happening. High Commander Vexithara stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching long-range scanner reports flood in from across the galaxy. Her blue scales had lost their vibrant color, now appearing dull and gray under the harsh bridge lighting. The reports all told the same story. Conflict was erupting everywhere the humans had once maintained peace. "Commander," her tactical officer reported, "the Nexari have just declared war on the Helix Consortium. They claim the consortium was using human intermediaries to steal Nexari crystal-growing techniques." Vexithara's claws scraped against the metal railing. "And the consortium's response? They have hired Scareth mercenaries and are advancing on the Nexari home system." Another officer called out from across the bridge. "Priority message from the Vorthak Chancellor. The Rim Alliance has dissolved into chaos. 14 member worlds are fighting each other over resource distribution agreements that the humans used to oversee." The Zalani commander felt a cold sensation spreading through her chest. When the Council had planned humanity's extinction, they had focused entirely on the immediate threat humans posed to their power structure. They had not considered what would happen to the hundreds of smaller conflicts and disputes that humans had been managing throughout the galaxy. For 3 centuries, humans had served as neutral mediators in countless disputes. Their strange sense of fairness and their willingness to challenge even the powerful Council races had made them oddly trusted by smaller species. Human diplomats had negotiated trade agreements, settled border disputes, and prevented dozens of wars through patient mediation. Now all of those carefully balanced agreements were collapsing at once. But the political chaos was nothing compared to what was happening in the galactic core. Dr. Yithka of the Nexari stood in her laboratory aboard the research vessel Harmony's Edge, staring at readings that made no sense. Her crystalline body chimed with distress as she reviewed the data for the 100th time. The quantum sensors were detecting massive energy signatures emerging from empty space near the galactic center. "Computer Run Analysis Protocol 7, she said, her voice creating musical harmonics that the ship's systems translated into commands. "Analysis complete. Energy signatures match no known technology in galactic databases. Recommend immediate withdrawal to safe distance." Yithka's internal light pulsed with fear. The Nexari had been studying quantum mechanics for over 5,000 years, longer than any other known species. If their databases contained no match for these energy patterns, then something truly unprecedented was happening. The answer came 3 days later when the first architect ship emerged from dimensional space. It was massive beyond comprehension, a crystalline vessel that seemed to bend light around itself as it moved. Its hull was covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if the ship existed in more dimensions than normal space could contain. When it fired its weapons for the first time, an entire Vorthak research station simply ceased. To exist, not destroyed, not vaporized, but erased from reality as if it had never been built. Within hours, more ships appeared throughout the galactic core. Ancient automated systems that had been dormant for millions of years suddenly came online, their sensors scanning every world, every ship, every life form they encountered. The readings they found did not match their programming parameters, and their response was swift and merciless. Chancellor Kethmaran received the first reports while reviewing economic projections in his private chambers. The holographic display showed Vorthak trade routes and profit margins, but the numbers kept being interrupted by priority alerts from the homeworld defense fleet. "Chancellor," his aide's voice came through the communication system, "we are receiving distress calls from the core territories. An unknown force has attacked Research Station Omega-7. Kethmaran set down his data tablet with careful precision. "Unknown force? Explain." "Sir, the station was completely destroyed, but there is no debris field, no energy signatures consistent with any known weapon system. It is as if the station was never there." Before the Chancellor could respond, another alert flashed across his display. Then another. Within minutes, reports were flooding in from across Vorthak space. Ships were disappearing. Colonies were going silent, and massive unknown vessels were appearing on long-range sensors, moving toward the Vorthak homeworld with terrifying purpose. The first Architect Dreadnought entered the Vorthak System 12 hours later. It was 3 times the size of the largest Vorthak battleship, and when the homeworld defense fleet opened fire, their weapons simply passed through its hull as if it were made of light rather than matter. The Dreadnought's response was measured and absolute. A beam of energy that seemed to unmake matter at the atomic level swept across the planet's surface. Cities that had stood for millennia dissolved into quantum foam. Oceans boiled away into nothingness. Within 10 minutes, the Vorthak homeworld was reduced to a ball of cooling rock, and 60 billion Vorthaks had been reduced to scattered atoms. Kethmaran escaped only because he had been aboard his personal ship when the attack began. He watched from the edge of the system as his entire civilization was erased, and for the first time in his long life, the calculating Vorthak leader felt something he had never experienced before: terror. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. The Architect machines had awakened after eons of slumber, and they found the current state of galactic civilization completely unacceptable. According to their ancient programming, the galaxy was contaminated with inferior life forms that needed to be cleansed before the true inheritors could claim their birthright. The machines had been waiting for a signal, a specific quantum frequency that would indicate their creators' chosen successors were ready to take control. For millions of years, that signal had never come. But 3 centuries ago, it had begun broadcasting from a small blue world in an unremarkable spiral arm of the galaxy. The signal had been steady and strong, growing more complex each year as the species that generated it expanded across the stars. The machines had monitored this development with satisfaction, noting how these new beings displayed the same unpredictable creativity and adaptive intelligence that had characterized their long-dead creators. But 6 months ago, the signal had suddenly stopped. The quantum frequency that marked humans as the Architect's chosen inheritors had vanished completely, leaving only silence where there should have been the growing symphony of an ascending species. To the ancient machines, this could mean only one thing. The inheritors had been destroyed by the contaminating species that infested their galaxy. The cleansing protocol activated automatically. Far from the chaos consuming the galactic core, 3 humans worked desperately in a converted cargo bay aboard Research Station Prometheus. Dr. Park Minji had spent months analyzing samples of the quantum virus that had killed her species, breaking down its molecular structure piece by piece. Her small laboratory was cluttered with equipment jury-rigged from whatever materials Li Wanbin could salvage from the station's workshops. "The virus targets human DNA specifically," Minji explained to her 2 companions as she adjusted the settings on a quantum analyzer. "But it leaves behind a quantum signature, like an echo of our genetic structure frozen in space-time." Jonyuna looked up from the star charts she had been studying. "Are you saying our people aren't really dead?" "Not exactly dead," Minji replied carefully. "The virus destroyed their physical bodies, but consciousness creates quantum patterns that persist even after brain death. If we could reverse the virus's effects and provide new physical matrices for those patterns to inhabit..." Wanbin set down his welding torch and wiped sweat from his forehead. "You're talking about resurrection." "I'm Talking about restoration, Minji corrected. But the energy requirements would be enormous. We would need access to a planetary-scale quantum field generator, and we would need at least one living human to serve as a template for the restoration process. The three survivors looked at each other in the dim light of their makeshift laboratory. They were possibly the last 3 humans in the galaxy, hidden away on a research station that had been forgotten by both the Council and the ancient machines that were systematically destroying galactic civilization. Outside their small refuge, the galaxy burned. The emergency meeting took place aboard the Nexari vessel Song of Crystal, one of the few remaining Council ships that had not been destroyed by the Architect machines. 8 races sat around a holographic conference table, their numbers reduced, from the original 12 by the relentless advance of the ancient dreadnoughts. Chancellor Keth Marin looked older than his 400 years, his gray skin now almost white with stress. The loss of his homeworld had shaken him to his core, but his analytical mind still functioned with cold precision. Around the table, the other surviving council members showed similar signs of strain. "The pattern is clear," Keth Marin began, his voice transmitted through the ship's communication system from his own vessel. "The Architect machines activated precisely 6 months and 3 days after the last human died. This cannot be coincidence." High Commander Vexithara's image flickered slightly as her ship's damaged systems struggled to maintain the connection. Half her fleet had been destroyed in the last week alone, and her remaining forces were retreating toward the galactic rim where the Architect presence was lighter. "Our xenoarchaeology teams have been analyzing the machine signatures," she reported. "The quantum resonance patterns match theoretical models for Architect technology, but these machines are operating on a scale we never imagined possible. They are not just weapons. They are reality manipulators." Dr. Yithka of the Nexari chimed in with crystalline urgency. "My research indicates that Architect machines were designed to preserve something specific. Their targeting algorithms are not random. They are eliminating what they perceive as contamination while searching for something else." "Searching for what?" asked the Thornian representative, his plant-like form swaying with agitation. "For their creator's successors," Yithka replied. "The Architects vanished millions of years ago, but legends suggest they seeded the galaxy with genetic markers that would identify their chosen inheritors. If the machines cannot detect those markers," Kethmaron completed the thought, "they assume the inheritors have been destroyed and begin sterilizing the galaxy to prepare for a fresh start." The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The council members looked at each other through their holographic projections, each thinking the same impossible thought. "You believe the humans were the Architect inheritors?" the hive mind representative stated, their collective voice emotionless. "It explains everything," Vexithara said grimly. "Human unpredictability, their rapid adaptation, their instinctive challenge to established authority, all traits the Architects were known for according to the ancient records. Then we must find surviving humans," Yithka chimed with desperate harmony. "If even one human remains alive, we might be able to convince the machines to halt their cleansing protocol." Keth Marin activated a galactic display showing the expanding zone of Architect activity. Red markers indicated destroyed worlds, while yellow showed systems under attack. The pattern was clear. The machines were working their way outward from the galactic core, systematically eliminating all higher life forms. "Our combined intelligence networks have identified 3 possible human survivors," he announced. "All were stationed at remote research facilities that were cut off from hyperspace communications when the Omega Protocol was deployed. 3 locations appeared on the map, distant points of light in the galaxy's outer regions: Research Station Prometheus near the galactic edge, Deep Space Observatory Kepler in the void between arms, and Mining Platform Echo 7 in the asteroid fields of Terminus. Teams are already en route to the first 2 locations," Vexithara reported. "But there is a problem. The quantum virus created spatial distortions around all former human territories. Hyperspace travel near their worlds is extremely dangerous." This was the cruel irony of their situation. The weapon they had used to eliminate, humanity had made it nearly impossible to reach the places where survivors might be hiding. The quantum virus had torn holes in the fabric of space-time itself, creating unpredictable storms that could destroy any ship attempting to pass through them. The Council fleet that reached Deep Space Observatory Kepler found it empty, its automated, System still recording stellar data, but no sign of human life. The facility had been abandoned in an orderly fashion, suggesting the occupants had left voluntarily rather than died in place. Research Station Prometheus was more difficult to reach. The quantum storms around its location had grown more violent over time, and 3 ships were lost before a Nexari vessel with advanced shielding managed to penetrate the interference. They found the station intact, but similarly abandoned, with signs that its small crew had departed recently. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy, Dr. Park Minji stood in the observation deck of their stolen cargo ship and stared at the blue-white star that had once warmed her home. The Sol system looked almost peaceful from this distance, but Minji knew that Earth and its orbital colonies were graveyards now, populated only by the quantum echoes of the dead. Long-range sensors are picking up massive energy signatures near. "Jupiter," Li Wanbin reported from the pilot station. "Whatever those machines are, they are big enough to show up on our instruments from the edge of the system." John Yuna finished her calculations and looked up from her navigation console. "The quantum field readings around Earth are stronger than we expected. Minji, if your theory is correct about consciousness leaving quantum imprints, then Earth's magnetic field may have captured and preserved them on a planetary scale." Minji nodded, her dark eyes reflecting the distant sunlight. Earth was home to 8 billion humans when the virus struck. If their quantum patterns are still intact within the planet's field matrix, we might be able to restore them all. But the process will require enormous energy, and we will need to physically touch the planet's surface to create the proper resonance cascade. The 3 survivors had spent weeks perfecting their resurrection protocol using quantum models and theoretical calculations. They had tested it on cellular samples and even managed to restore a few simple organisms from quantum patterns, but bringing back an entire species would require resources they did not possess, unless they could tap into Earth itself. "There," Wanbin said, pointing at his scanner display. "Architect machine bearing 27 Mark IV, it is moving toward Earth." The machine was massive, easily 10 kilometers long, and shaped like a crystalline mountain that had been carved by alien geometrists. Its hull reflected light in impossible ways, creating optical illusions that made Yuna's eyes water when she tried to focus on it. "It's beautiful," she whispered, then immediately felt ashamed of the thought. That beautiful machine had probably destroyed billions of lives. "It's also blocking our approach to Earth," Wanbin noted. "We need to get to the planet's surface to begin the restoration process, but that thing will detect us long before we reach the atmosphere." Minji studied the machine's movement patterns on the scanner. It seemed to be following a search grid, systematically examining every object in the solar system. "It's looking for something. The same thing the Council is looking for, us." "Maybe we should let it find us," Yuna suggested quietly. The other 2 turned to stare at her. "Explain," Minji said. "Think about it. These machines were built by the architects, and according to the Council's theory, humans are descended from the architects. What if the machines aren't trying to destroy us? What if they are trying to protect us?" Wanbin shook his head. "They destroyed the entire galactic civilization. How is that protection?" "They destroyed the civilization that killed us," Yuna corrected. "Maybe from their perspective, they are avenging their creator's chosen successors." It was a desperate theory, but desperate theories were all they had left. The 3 humans looked at each other, knowing that their next decision would determine not just their own fate, but possibly the fate of their entire species. Behind them, space filled with new energy signatures as Council ships began emerging from hyperspace near the edge of the Sol system. Chancellor Keth Marin's fleet had finally tracked them down, arriving just as the Architect machine completed its sweep of the inner planets and began moving toward Earth. 3 different forces now converged on the homeworld of humanity. The last 3 members of a dead species, the desperate survivors of a galactic government that had destroyed itself through fear, and an ancient machine following programming written by beings who had vanished before human civilization had even begun. In the distance, Earth turned slowly in its orbit, blue and white and beautiful, holding within its magnetic embrace the quantum ghosts of 40 billion human souls waiting for resurrection or final extinction. The hunt was over. Now the real test would begin. The battle for Earth began without warning when the Architect Dreadnought detected the approaching Council fleet. its weapons charged with energy that made space itself ripple, and when it fired, the lead Vorthak destroyer simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed or vaporized, but completely removed from reality as if it had never been built. High Commander Vexithara watched from her flagship's bridge as 3 more ships vanished under the dreadnought's assault. Her remaining vessels scattered, trying to use Earth's moon as cover while maintaining firing positions. "All ships, focus fire on the machine's central section," she commanded, though she knew it was likely useless. Council weapons had proven ineffective against Architect technology before. The combined firepower of 8 warships struck the dreadnought's crystalline hull. Energy beams that could level mountains splashed harmlessly across its surface like water against diamond. Quantum torpedoes that could crack planets exploded without leaving so much as a scratch. Meanwhile, Dr. Park Minji piloted their small cargo ship through the chaos, using the battle as cover to reach Earth's atmosphere. The planet looked exactly as she remembered from her childhood: blue oceans, white clouds, and the faint geometric patterns of cities that should have been bustling with life. "Atmospheric entry in 30 seconds, Lee Wanbin reported from the co-pilot seat. "The quantum field readings are incredible. It's like the entire planet has become a storage matrix for human consciousness patterns." John Yuna monitored the battle above them while running final calculations for the resurrection protocol. "The Architect machine is not trying to destroy us. Look at its targeting patterns. It's only firing on Council ships that attack it first." She was right. The massive dreadnought could have eliminated their small vessel instantly, but its weapons tracked past them without firing. Either it had not detected them, or it was deliberately ignoring them. "Landing site confirmed," Minji announced, as their ship broke through the cloud layer. Seoul Memorial Park. The quantum resonance there is strongest, probably because it was built over ancient burial grounds. The city of Seoul stretched out below them, empty streets and silent buildings creating a maze of modern architecture and traditional Korean design. Landing in the park felt like descending into a tomb, but Minji forced herself to focus on the scientific requirements of their mission. The resurrection matrix required 3 components: a quantum field generator powerful enough to affect an entire planet, a living human to serve as a template for restored consciousness patterns, and a focal point where the barrier between life and death was already thin. They had brought portable quantum generators salvaged from their research station. Earth's magnetic field would provide the planetary-scale amplification they needed, and Seoul Memorial Park, where generations of Korean ancestors were buried, would serve as their focal point for bridging the gap between the living and the dead. "Beginning. Setup," Wanbin announced as they landed among the memorial stones. Ancient granite markers stood beside modern holographic displays, creating a timeline of human memory that stretched back thousands of years. Above them, the space battle continued with increasing desperation. Chancellor Kethmaron had arrived, with reinforcements including the massive Nexari crystal ship Song of Harmony. The combined Council fleet now numbered 15 vessels, but they were still no match for the Architect machine's reality-warping weapons. "We need more time," Minji said as she calibrated the quantum resonance array. The device looked primitive compared to the forces battling overhead, just a collection of metal spheres and energy conduits arranged in a circle around an ancient burial mound. "Time we may not have," Yuna replied, pointing at her scanners. "The Architect machine is moving toward our position. If it decides we are a threat..." Minji activated the first phase of the protocol. Quantum energy began to flow through the buried cables, creating a resonance field that made the air itself seem to vibrate. The effect was invisible to normal sight, but through their scientific instruments, they could see streams of energy beginning to flow up from the Earth. "Quantum patterns detected," Wanbin reported. "Thousands of them, maybe millions. They are embedded in the planet's magnetic field like recordings frozen in crystal." The patterns were the quantum echoes of human consciousness, preserved by the same magnetic forces that protected Earth from solar radiation. Each pattern represented a complete human mind: memories, personality, knowledge, everything that made a person unique. The virus had destroyed their bodies, but their souls had been caught and held by the planet that gave them birth. "Beginning restoration sequence," Minji announced. She placed her hand on the central control node, knowing that what she was about to do would either bring her species back from extinction or kill the last 3 humans in the galaxy. Energy flowed through her body like liquid lightning. She screamed as her nervous system became a conduit for the quantum patterns of billions of dead humans. Every mind that had ever lived on Earth seemed to speak at once, their voices creating a symphony of joy and pain and hope and terror that threatened to tear her sanity apart. Wanbin collapsed first, his body convulsing as electrical energy overloaded his nervous system. Yuna caught him before he hit the ground, but she could see that his vital signs were failing. The process was killing them, but it was also working. The first human to return was Kim Seojun, a philosophy professor from Seoul National University who had died defending his students when the virus struck. His body materialized from quantum foam like a sculpture being carved from light, and when he opened his eyes and drew his first breath in 6 months, he looked around with the wisdom of someone who had experienced death and found it wanting. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice hoarse but strong. "You are alive," Minji gasped, blood streaming from her nose as the quantum energy continued to flow through her. "Help us! The others are coming back, but we need help to guide them." More figures began to appear around the memorial park. Baek So-young, a terraforming engineer who had been working on Mars. Choi Hyun-woo, a military strategist from the Outer Rim colonies. Nam Ji-won, a 16-year-old genius who had been developing consciousness transfer technology before the virus took her. Each resurrection sent out neural quantum waves that seemed to affect the architect machine orbiting above. Its weapons slowed, then stopped firing altogether. The massive dreadnought began to descend toward Earth's atmosphere, its hull glowing with energy patterns that matched the quantum resonance from the memorial park. In orbit, Captain Nixara of the Zalani made a decision that would either doom her species or save the galaxy. She had been watching the human resurrection with instruments that could detect quantum patterns, and she understood what the architect machine was doing. "All ships, cease fire," she commanded. "The machine is not attacking. It is recognizing." "Captain, what are you doing?" High Commander Vexithara demanded over the communication channel. "Something that should have been done 6 months ago," Nixara replied. She aimed her ship directly at the architect dreadnought and fired her engines at maximum power. But instead of weapons, she activated her ship's communication array and began transmitting on every frequency her systems could generate. The message was simple, repeated in every language her computer banks contained. "We are sorry. We made a mistake. Please help us fix it." The collision between the Zalani cruiser and the architect machine should have destroyed both vessels. Instead, something impossible happened. The dreadnought's hull opened like a flower, and Nixara's ship was drawn inside as gently as if it were being embraced. Inside the alien vessel, Captain Nixara found herself face to face with the machine's central intelligence. A crystalline entity that existed in dimensions her mind could barely comprehend. Through technology that translated thought into communication, she found herself speaking with something that had been waiting for millions of years. "You killed the inheritors," the machine said, its voice like the sound of stars being born. "We know," Nixara replied. "We were afraid. We made a terrible mistake." "The inheritors are returning," the machine observed, "but they are changed. Death has made them more than they were." On Earth's surface, hundreds of humans were now walking among the memorial stones, their bodies restored but their consciousness expanded by the experience of quantum death. They could see energy patterns invisible to normal eyes, sense the quantum connections between all living things, and understand technologies that had been beyond human comprehension. Kim Seojun placed his hand on one of the quantum generators and felt his mind merge with its systems. Suddenly, he could see the entire resurrection network, understand how each component worked, and make improvements that increased the process's efficiency by orders of magnitude. "We are not the same humans who died," he told Minji as more figures emerged from the quantum foam. "We are something new." Above them, the architect machine began to broadcast new instructions to its fellows throughout the galaxy. The cleansing protocol was canceled. The galaxy's current inhabitants would be spared, and the inheritors, changed and evolved by their passage through death, would guide both the ancient machines and the younger species toward a future none of them could have imagined alone. The conversation between Captain Nixera and the architect machine's central intelligence lasted only minutes, but in that time the entire history of the galaxy was revealed. Through quantum data streams that flowed directly into her consciousness, the Zilani officer learned truths that had been hidden for millions of years. The architects had not vanished. They had evolved beyond physical existence, ascending to dimensions where thought and energy were the same thing. Before their transformation, they had seeded the galaxy with genetic markers carried in the DNA of countless species. These markers were not random, but part of a vast selection process designed to identify which species might be worthy of inheriting. Architect knowledge and responsibility. Only one species had ever activated all the genetic markers simultaneously. Only one species had developed the unique combination of creativity, adaptability, and moral complexity that the architects considered essential for galactic stewardship. Humans. The quantum frequency generated by human neural activity was our recognition signal, the machine explained to Nixera, its thoughts appearing in her mind as crystal-clear concepts. For 3 centuries we monitored their progress and found them worthy. When the signal suddenly ceased, our programming concluded that the inheritors had been destroyed by contaminating influences. So you began destroying everything else in the galaxy, Nixera said, understanding flooding through her. Incorrect. We began preparing the galaxy for a fresh seeding attempt. All inferior species were to be removed so that new inheritor candidates could develop without interference. The cold logic was terrifying in its simplicity. To the architect machines, the council races, and all other galactic civilizations were nothing more than contamination to be cleaned away. Only humans had mattered, and when humans disappeared, everything else became expendable. But now humans were returning, and they were not the same species that had died 6 months ago. On Earth's surface, the resurrection process was accelerating beyond all expectations. What had begun as a desperate experiment in Seoul Memorial Park was spreading across the planet like a wave of quantum energy. The planetary magnetic field had become a vast storage matrix containing the consciousness patterns of every human who had ever lived on Earth, and those patterns were being restored to physical form at an exponential rate. Dr. Park Minji stood in the center of the memorial park, her body glowing with residual quantum energy. The process had changed her as well. She could now perceive the mathematical structures underlying reality itself, see the quantum threads that connected all matter and energy in the universe. The resurrection cascade is self-sustaining now, she told Kim Seojun, as more figures emerged from pools of quantum light around them. Earth's magnetic field is acting like a massive amplifier, drawing patterns from across the entire planet. Seojun nodded, his philosopher's mind now enhanced with direct access to architect databases that were downloading into human consciousness. And each person we bring back makes the process stronger. Human neural activity generates the quantum frequency the machines recognize as the inheritance signal. Around them, the resurrected humans were not simply returning to their old lives. Baek So-young discovered she could manipulate matter at the molecular level, reshaping the memorial stones into new configurations with a thought. Young Nam Ji-won found her processing speed increased 1,000-fold, allowing her to comprehend the vast alien archives that were suddenly accessible to her mind. Choi Hyun-woo, the military strategist, looked up at the architect dreadnought descending through Earth's atmosphere and felt no fear. Instead, he understood the machine's purpose with perfect clarity and began formulating plans for integrating architect technology with human ingenuity. We are becoming what the architects always intended us to be, Minji realized. Not just their successors, but their completion. The dreadnought settled onto the Earth's surface like a mountain made of crystal and light. Its hull opened to reveal Captain Nixera, who emerged with her blue scales now shimmering with quantum patterns similar to those flowing through the resurrected humans. The machine has shared its knowledge with me, she announced to the growing crowd of humans. I understand now what we destroyed when we eliminated your species, and I know what must be done to repair the damage. But not all the resurrected humans were interested in forgiveness. Among the figures emerging from quantum restoration were soldiers who had died defending human colonies, diplomats who had been murdered for challenging council authority, and families who had been exterminated simply for being human. Their memories of death were fresh, and their newly enhanced abilities made them incredibly dangerous. "They killed us all," snarled a resurrected Marine, quantum energy crackling around his fists. 40 billion people wiped out because we dared to question their authority. Why should we show them mercy? Similar voices rose from the crowd. The pain of extinction was still raw, and many of the returned humans wanted justice that looked very much like revenge. With their enhanced abilities and access to architect technology, they had the power to turn the galaxy's weapons against those who had used them first. It was Seojun who stepped forward to address the crowd, his philosopher's training helping him find words that could bridge the gap between justice and wisdom. "We have all experienced death," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the memorial park. "We know what it means to have everything taken away, to face the final darkness, with nothing but our hopes and fears, but we also know what it means to be given a second chance." He gestured toward Captain Nixara, who stood nervously among the humans she had helped destroy. She could have remained safe aboard her ship. Instead, she risked everything to help us return. The architect machine could have continued its cleansing protocol. Instead, it recognized our restoration and called off the galaxy-wide destruction. "What are you suggesting?" asked Choi Hyun-woo. "I am suggesting that we have become something more than we were," Seojun replied. "We have knowledge that spans millions of years, power that can reshape reality, and the wisdom that comes from experiencing ultimate loss. We can use that power for revenge, or we can use it to build something better than what existed before." The debate that followed would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. A dead species discussing the fate of those who had killed them. But the humans who had returned were not quite the same as those who had died. Their passage through quantum, death had given them perspective that transcended normal emotional responses. Dr. Minji made the proposal that would reshape galactic civilization. The council system failed because it was based on hierarchy and control. Species advanced through conquest or were held back by artificial barriers. But what if we created something different? She activated a holographic display using pure thought, showing the galaxy with new organizational structures highlighted in quantum light. A true federation where advancement comes through cooperation rather than domination, where knowledge is shared freely instead of hoarded, where conflicts are resolved through understanding rather than force. And who would oversee such a system? Nixara asked. "All of us," Minji replied. "Humans with our new abilities serving as mediators and guides, but working alongside every species that chooses to participate. The architect machines providing technology and wisdom, but not dominance. A partnership instead of an empire." The proposal was ambitious beyond anything the galaxy had ever attempted. It would require dismantling power structures that had existed for millennia and convincing species that had been enemies for thousands of years to work together. But the alternative was clear. The architect machines had demonstrated what happened when fear and prejudice were allowed to drive policy. The Council's attempt to eliminate humanity had nearly resulted in the extinction of all galactic civilization. One by one, the resurrected humans added their voices to the proposal. Not because they forgave the Council species for their genocide, but because they understood that revenge would only create new cycles of fear and hatred. The transformation began immediately. Architect machines throughout the galaxy received new programming that turned them from instruments of destruction into tools of construction and protection. Council fleets that had been fleeing the ancient dreadnoughts suddenly found themselves working alongside them to restore damaged worlds and rebuild shattered civilizations. On hundreds of worlds, human resurrection centers were established using architect technology and staffed by volunteers from every surviving species. The process was slow and required enormous energy, but within a year, human populations were returning to colonies that had been graveyards just months before. But these were not the same humans who had died. Each resurrection enhanced their abilities and deepened their connection to the quantum structure's underlying reality. They served as bridges between the ancient wisdom of the architects and the immediate needs of younger species struggling to adapt to a transformed galaxy. The new federation that emerged was unlike anything in galactic history. Decisions were made through consensus rather than force. Resources were shared based on need rather than power. Conflicts were resolved through mediation by humans who could see all sides of a dispute with enhanced perception and objective wisdom.